was evident. We provided a substantial 5.6 billion ringgit in funding schemes to bolster and uplift businesses. As a development financial institution or DFI, Bank Pembangunan faces the challenge of balancing the country's long-term development needs with short-term cycles of crisis, whilst navigating the complexities of an ever-evolving environment. Now, Bank Pembangunan has pivoted towards ensuring financial sustainability when we finance Malaysia's development. This is highlighted by our MIND framework, which stands for Measuring Impact on National Development, that we jointly developed with the World Bank. This framework supports the government's commitment to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and aligns with the Madani Economy Framework. Our achievement in the past 50 years underscores our agility in aligning our mandate and financing activities with the various economic and social development policies. Indeed, we have established ourselves as a leading Malaysian DFI in delivering impact capital for national development. As did in the past 50 years, Bank Pembangunan will continue to be a partner in Malaysia's development for the next 50 years. Over the last 50 years, Bank Pembangunan boasts many success stories, firmly entrenched in Malaysia's economic development, dedicated to delivering impact capital for national development. In our early years, we were mandated to bridge the gap in the then existing institutions to fulfill economic commitments set forth by the government in the Second Malaysia Plan and the new economic policy. We supported and developed Malay entrepreneurs to reduce the economic disparities and ensure inclusive participation in Malaysia's economic development. In the 1990s, our mandate expanded to provide catalytic investment to finance strategic infrastructure like the Petronas Twin Towers, Sprint Highway, and Express Rail Link. In the 2000s, our mandate focused on financing high-growth sectors. Some of the notable projects that we financed included the Smart Tunnel and KL Central. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Bank Pembangunan's role as a counter-cyclical lender was evident. We provided a substantial 5.6 billion ringgit in funding schemes to bolster and uplift businesses. As a development financial institution or DFI, Bank Pembangunan faces the challenge of balancing the country's long-term development needs with short-term cycles of crisis, whilst navigating the complexities of an ever-evolving environment. Now, Bank Pembangunan has pivoted towards ensuring financial sustainability when we finance Malaysia's development. This is highlighted by our MIND framework, which stands for Measuring Impact on National Development, that we jointly developed with the World Bank. This framework supports the government's commitment to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and aligns with the Madani Economy Framework. Our achievement in the past 50 years underscores our agility in aligning our mandate and financing activities with the various economic and social development policies. Indeed, we have established ourselves as a leading Malaysian DFI in delivering impact capital for national development. As did in the past 50 years, Bank Pembangunan will continue to be a partner in Malaysia's development for the next 50 years. Over the last 50 years, Bank Pembangunan boasts many success stories, firmly entrenched in Malaysia's economic development, dedicated to delivering impact capital for national development. In our early years, we were mandated to bridge the gap in the then existing institutions to fulfill economic commitments set forth by the government in the Second Malaysia Plan and the new economic policy. We supported and developed Malay entrepreneurs to reduce the economic disparities and ensure inclusive participation in Malaysia's economic development. In the 1990s, our mandate expanded to provide catalytic investment to finance strategic infrastructure like the Petronas Twin Towers, Sprint Highway, and Express Rail Link. In the 2000s, our mandate focused on financing high-growth sectors. Some of the notable projects that we financed included the Smart Tunnel and KL Central. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Bank Pembangunan's role as a counter-cyclical lender was evident. We provided a substantial 5.6 billion ringgit in funding schemes to bolster and uplift businesses. As a development financial institution or DFI, Bank Pembangunan faces the challenge of balancing the country's long-term development needs with short-term cycles of crisis, whilst navigating the complexities of an ever-evolving environment. Now, Bank Pembangunan has pivoted towards ensuring financial sustainability when we finance Malaysia's development. This is highlighted by our MIND framework, which stands for Measuring Impact on National Development, that we jointly developed with the World Bank. This framework supports the government's commitment to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and aligns with the Madani Economy Framework. Our achievement in the past 50 years underscores our agility in aligning our mandate and financing activities with the various economic and social development policies. Indeed, we have established ourselves as a leading Malaysian DFI in delivering impact capital for national development. As did in the past 50 years, Bank Pembangunan will continue to be a partner in Malaysia's development for the next 50 years. Over the last 50 years, Bank Pembangunan boasts many success stories, firmly entrenched in Malaysia's economic development, dedicated to delivering impact capital for national development. In our early years, we were mandated to bridge the gap in the then existing institutions to fulfill economic commitments set forth by the government in the Second Malaysia Plan and the new economic policy. We supported and developed Malay entrepreneurs to reduce the economic disparities and ensure inclusive participation in Malaysia's economic development. In the 1990s, our mandate expanded to provide catalytic investment to finance strategic infrastructure like the Petronas Twin Towers, Sprint Highway, and Express Rail Link. In the 2000s, our mandate focused on financing high-growth sectors.
Keep you guys waiting as we have some technical issues just now. So everything's sorted out. And I think we are ready for our second session, right? So good day and welcome to the Malaysia Pavilion. So before we start, just a quick note, there is a business matching platform that we encourage all the delegates to register and make most of this chance to connect with the fellow delegates. So there will be a QR code outside our room, and also it will be pop up on the screen. So later maybe you can scan the QR code and then you can match with the other delegates and connect with the others. All right. So I think we are ready to move on with our next session, which addresses the urgent need for climate adaptation financing in the region, with projected climate-related losses reaching USD 97.3 billion by 2030. So this session will discuss strategies for assessing global funds and explore the potential for a regional adaptation fund. So our panelists will also share innovative financing models such as parametric insurance and sustainable sukuk, providing practical solutions to scale adaptation efforts across ASEAN. Hence, to deep delve into this topic, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for this session. We have the first one is Dr. Maciej Sokolowski from Keio University. The second one, we have Mr. Masa Takanashi, Chief Sustainability Officer of Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation. We also have Mr. Shahril Azwa Jimin, Group Chief Sustainability Officer of Maybank. And then we have Ms. Melissa Moy, the Head of Sustainable Business at UOB Bank. And then we have Mr. John Adrian Narak, Director at the Department of Finance Philippines. And lastly, we have Ms. Amanda Lunamera, the Senior Manager at Carbon Trust. Not to forget, to moderate this session, we have Mr. Joel Carr, the Head of Mine and Sustainability at Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad. So for you guys' information, this panel will be divided into two parts. Part one will be a presentation on adaptation strategies and best practices. And then we will continue to part two, will be a panel discussion on adaptation and funding need in ASEAN. So without further ado, I would like to call the following presenters and moderator for part one on the stage. Dr. Maciej, Mr. Masa Takanashi, Ms. Amanda Lunamera, and Mr. Joel Carr. All right, over to you, Mr. Joel.
Hello. Hi. Very good morning to everyone, honorable guests, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joel. I'm the Head of Mine and Sustainability at Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad, one of Malaysia's largest development financial institutions. So, I think the topic today is very timely, and as we are here gathered at the Climate Change Conference, I think climate finance is at the heart of the central of the discussion. And adaptation has increasingly been the main topic at ASEAN. So we have seen an increasing flow of climate finance globally over the past few years. And we have seen tremendous growth in terms of climate mitigation efforts across the region and globally. The question is it enough? Despite ambitious pledges and progress in climate actions, globally we are not on track in meeting the climate targets to limit temperature rise by 1.5 or 2 degrees. Failure to mitigate would make it more important to adapt. But so far, only around 5% of global climate finance has been mobilized for climate adaptation, which is alarming. So as members of the ASEAN community, we share not only a geographic and cultural bond, but also a common responsibility to safeguard our environment, protect our citizens, and secure a sustainable future. So we are living in a time of unprecedented climate challenges. So across Southeast Asia, we are witnessing increasing temperatures, rising sea levels, more intense storms, and unpredictable weather patterns. Climate change is not just an environmental concern, they are threats to our economies, our food security, our water supplies, and our way of life. Therefore, today's session is important to discuss what can we do to build climate resilience through adaptation, and how do we finance these initiatives. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker today, Dr. Professor Mac, to take the stage to discuss on, to present on the climate initiatives.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joel, thank you very much for your wonderful address. Actually, you could speak a bit longer, I think, because it was very good, touching the base related to this discussion that we'll handle here in this wonderful Malaysian pavilion. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate all the people engaged in this pavilion with Ms. Alma at the head and other people responsible for this panel. They are online, I know, they are listening to this panel. That's great that we are here together by the very friendly Malaysian colleagues under your flag. But I would like to discuss the bigger picture, the ASEAN, and do an adaptation strategies review, just to introduce the scale of engagement that is doing in the Southeast Asia. And I was informed that I should click here. Oh yeah, it works even. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so we manage. Artificial intelligence, let's say. So adaptation, and we have here a chart that gathers different areas related to adaptation that should be tackled by the governments, by the people, local governments, all the stakeholders, business, the finance sector, all that are touched by the climate change. And in ASEAN, there are a couple of fields that match all the region. And I believe that it should be a top priority to touch them first if you want to talk about the bigger strategy that could be implemented in all the region and adapt easily from one part to another part. And the crux of it is agriculture, as many of the people who live there are involved or rely on this important sector. And moreover, the world relies on ASEAN when it comes to all the products that come from this wonderful part of the world. Of course, there are also other fields. There are big cities, metropolis, like Kiel, Kuala Lumpur, or Singapore itself, but also other parts of the world there that are smart cities, and that could be very interesting benchmark for the Asia, including Japan, but also other parts of the world. So we can also learn from ASEAN and watch how their adaptation strategies work in the real life. But apart from these elements, we have also specific actions that are offered. And here I made a framework that could be a kind of benchmark that then could be adapted in real practice by government, by policymakers, to implement these strategies in the real life. So these are the 8 elements on which we should build a kind of standard under the Paris Agreement. But the most important element, I think, as a person working in this area for a couple of good years, I would like to be a student still, but the more I go into this field, the older I feel. But there's a framework that's very interesting and could be a kind of a policy tool easily acceptable worldwide, and this is just transition. Like here I have a tag from wonderful Malaysian pavilion from Dubai last year, just energy transition. And as well as this framework is very good as a benchmark for adaptation strategies. This just adaptation strategies, or just energy policy, or just climate policy. Basing this adaptation on justice means stakeholder involvement, but equal stakeholder involvement, different stakeholder involvement, and understanding of this framework. Because what's very important here is to gather all the different groups that are either engaged or not engaged, or that should be engaged, even the opponents. And I think the opponents of climate, let's call it like this, because as we see how the wind of history blows, even right now, and how it's gonna blow very soon, in January 6th, I think. So I believe that the justice here is a kind of universal framework that could be a kind of a key to developing this in the real life. And I also made a jigsaw there, matching this JWAD, UST, on the previous slide. But looking at the implementation of adaptation actions. So I made a kind of review of different actions that are now implemented by countries from the region. I didn't tag the countries because we are here under the Malaysian flag, but I just show some nice examples from the region without touching the names of the countries, but all of you are experts here, so you can easily recognize where it was implemented. So for instance, when we talk about adaptation, we did actions. Actions in the democratic countries are based on the plans, strategies, projects. So there's, for instance, a Mekong Delta plan that focuses on sustainable development, adaptation to climate change. There are also local initiatives like People's Survival Fund, related to adaptation projects, related to funding. This COP is about finances. Here we have great experts gathered in this panel from banking sector, and they really know how to finance this from the top-down approach. But we also have the bottom-up approach, where the local people gather their funds supported by local governments, and they then invest in the food resilient infrastructure. I just mentioned the agriculture as being a key field for this climate adaptation. And here local people, so the local stakeholders engage in the adaptation projects related to vulnerable areas. Next slide. Yeah, I manage even on my own. Yeah, goals on reducing vulnerabilities or objectives to strengthen infrastructure. When we talk about policy making, we need goals. It's like going to the gym. We need a goal. It's like running in a marathon. We need a goal. People are steered by the goals of our life. You are steered by the goals attending this climate conference. Whether it's networking, whether it's finding new partners, whether it's gaining some knowledge, sightseeing in Azerbaijan or doing any other interesting things, people are driven by the goals. Same with the countries, same with all the organizations. We are driven by the goals. And these goals should be included in the strategies, in these plans. Without this, we don't know where we go. We don't have a captain. Navigare necesse est, as in Latin. We need to navigate. We need to navigate in the climate adaptation. And as example here, we need to put these goals in our strategies, whether it's about vulnerabilities, whether it's about strengthening infrastructure, whether it's about resources, whether it's about early warning systems. Next slide. Yes. Then, integration of science, gender, local knowledge. This adaptation is about science. It's about relying on science. Science brings us developments, whether it comes to finances, like in this panel, the smart modern financing systems, matrix, etc. Artificial intelligence applied for the needs of climate, adaptation, early warning. Same comes to the local knowledge. We should also listen to the people who have experience. For instance, there's an old story in Japan about people who managed to overcome very strong tsunami coming because they were listening to the old people who had experience related to the previous tsunamis, and they learned them where to build the buildings and so on. So this is the past data that is available, and now we can easily digitalize it with the use of loads of applications and so on. We have also other groups that we should listen more, I believe. Women, as the father of wonderful daughter, or ethnic minorities, as in the ASEAN countries, but also in Japan, for instance, where there are different people living in the north or the south of Japan, if we believe that Okinawa is south. But there are also other groups here, very important, the YAF, that should be included, because then they will take the responsibility for adaptation, for the mitigation, and so on. And this especially, this argument about utilizing the YAF resources and their knowledge and experience and ideas is very important, especially in these developed societies, where the greening societies, where we have many elderly people who take the lead nowadays. Development of priorities. As I mentioned about the objectives, then we need to find the most important objectives, the priorities. For instance, climate smart agriculture. As I said, agriculture is very important to be tackled in this specific region, which is ASEAN, but also in the whole world, in Africa too. And we have, with the help of technology and the science that I just mentioned, we can use different developments. For instance, as in Japan, we can use robots for the needs of agriculture. When we face extreme heat temperature, it's very hot. Why people should go there and then face the stroke, for instance. There are many deaths related to strokes, heat stroke. It's a silent death. Heat kills people, and we don't calculate those victims of what climate. He just went to the field, do some rice collecting, do some vegetables cutting on any other agricultural work, and then he or she passed away, yeah, because of a heat, because of a stroke, yeah. It's a victim of what? Of who, we could say, of what? Water resources management, also important asset as at the charter, as the chart at the beginning, yeah. Let me move on. Co-benefits, urban green reforestation, urban planning. The cities of ASEAN are green cities. These are wonderful assets that should be used worldwide. The concrete city is a hot city, is a heat island. It's very dangerous to be in such a field. When we use the city planning, urban tools, greening cities, it's not only, it looks nice, it's also good for our health and our safety, we should say. There are many benefits of using this type of solutions. For instance, Tokyo, smart city idea, Tokyo 2030, wants to green the bay part as much as possible. But these cities like Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or other parts of the world exist, and these are very interesting benchmark. Integrating climate into development. So climate adaptation is not only about the costs, it's also about the chances related to technological development, as I said, related to development of the country itself. As I mentioned, also universities, so this synergy of science and development, mitigating climate. For instance, in the region, there are climate chairs available. So the research related to climate grows there. And that's very important because then we have those experts, your capacity to support the government, to support the local people. If the government doesn't want to hear, you can always talk with local people, or you can find the local projects. They want to utilize the knowledge you have. Just 2 or 3 more slides and that would be over. So then the nature-based solution, as I said, many of these puzzles match together. A while ago I was talking about the greening the cities, but also about the greening those parts that were deforested before. It's kind of reforestation that also help, even when it comes to fishing, even when it comes to agriculture, even when it comes to, and the very obvious, to the biodiversity. Stakeholder involvement. I mentioned at the very beginning that we have to do it the just way. It needs to catch those groups that are sometimes resilient. They are sometimes not willing to join this energy transition, climate adaptation, all these moving trends related to climate. That's why we should talk with the people. We can also use the digital solutions. We can use the internet to reach these people. But as always, this direct discussion can really help to finding those agents of a positive change. At the very end, I wanted to quote the President Eisenhower. So we can have a great plans, but the thing important in this process is the planning. So trying to be dynamic in this way, because we may have different circumstances. We could think that another person would be a president of the leading country in the world, but then there's another president. So we need to change our approach. Same comes to the natural disasters, same comes to different extraordinary circumstances, like wars happening and so on. Yeah? That's why we should be dynamic in this process. So it's not about throwing the plan, but changing the plan if needed. These are the couple of references. As I'm coming from academia, I always have to use it. It's something about ethics. And last but not least, benchmarks from Japan. What we do in Japan is this very interesting approach of combining the two big platforms of digital transition and green transition. So as I said, there are robots, there are also the digital agents that could be helpful in overcoming problems related to climate. Because many people nowadays use metaverse, for instance. Kind of a month ago, I was visiting a university in one of the countries from the region, but I did it online. So I had a tour in the metaverse. So we can also use these new platforms for addressing the problems I already discussed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Tarima Kasim, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm not disappearing. I'm gonna wait for the panel session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Mark. Moving on, we'd like to invite Masa Takanashi from SMBC for his presentation.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you very much for providing me the opportunity here. Thank you very much. My name is Masa Takanashi. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of SMBC, a Japanese bank. And I don't think the presentation is on. Okay. Well, before, obviously, we'll talk about adaptation, but if I can use a little bit, a couple of minutes to just talk about our overall vision of a company. As you can see on the right-hand side, obviously, the left circle, we are pursuing, increase in returns and profits. We continue to update our control and governance, but another key pillar of our midterm strategy is to create social value. And there are 5 areas that we are focusing on, priority issues, and the first is obviously the environment. I know I'm very aware that we're talking about adaptation, but if I can talk a little bit about mitigation as well, one area that we are focusing on is transition finance. We actually created what we call our transition finance playbook, which is basically the objective is to kind of communicate to internal and external stakeholders for them to be aware of the projects that we are focusing on, so that people we can have the same idea on what sort of projects that we are going to support. We also ran this for about a year already. We actually have published recently what we call our Transition Finance Scorebook, which basically is trying to call on people for the findings that we had through the running of the Transition Finance Playbook. As you can see on the bottom, there are 4 areas that we would like to communicate. One is, I think it's very important for countries to have more detailed national roadmaps. Also, I think it's very important that financial institutions focus more on financing where the emissions are. Cost-sharing mechanisms, I think there's a lot of work to do here as well. And I think everyone is talking about blended finance, so everyone knows about this. So those were the areas that we wanted to communicate before I just talk about adaptation. So now adaptation. There are, I think, compared to mitigation, the focus for adaptation has been less, frankly, compared to, again, mitigation. And I don't think we are the only financial institutions to say that. But at the same time, I do think that, focus on adaptation and resilience is increasing. The support that we have been providing to adaptation projects, I think a lot of people do focus on risk management, or maybe people call them resilience. But I think there are opportunities, business opportunities around this as well. I'll talk about this later on. For us, we are making efforts to create, measures to promote adaptation, not just about financing products, which I also would like to talk about later on. But also, I think there are opportunities for various stakeholders to collaborate, maybe more than mitigation. We'll talk about the consortium that we have joined recently around adaptation as well. Just as an example, for maybe around resilience, I tried to find a project that we did in Malaysia. Unfortunately, I did not succeed. So forgive me for providing a project that we did in the Philippines. But obviously, I think it's, we have common understanding of these issues. We all know that more frequent and severe droughts are rising, and flash floods damage water infrastructure as well. At the same time, especially in Asia, we have insufficient water supply due to, for instance, like leakages as well, and the lack of, billing, metering errors. That's also an issue as well. But at the same time, we are seeing an increase in demand. And so we have to tackle all these issues at the same time. So one project that we did recently was with JICA, which is a Japanese agency that basically implements ODA for the Japanese government. I think it's important for us to mention this project because it's, blended finance that a lot of people talk about. We were able to update the water distribution pipes as well as develop new ones. Expansion of existing water treatment plants was another area that we focused on as well. And by doing that, as you can see on the right-hand side, we were able to increase water conservation, enhanced water infrastructure to protect potential damages from extreme weather events. And most importantly, I think we were able to create financial stability for the water company. I think for us to be sustainable in this world, I think it's very important for these companies to have financial stability as well. A second example that I would like to raise here is more on the opportunity side. I think we should manage risk, but I think we should think a little bit more about how we can create business opportunities around adaptation as well. We were able to finance a land-based aquaculture project in Japan. As I think everyone knows in this room, that because of the rising sea temperatures, fishery industries is massively affected. The amount of fish catch volumes is also decreasing, but we need to feed the growing population of the world. And also, the current, fishing business does have GHG emissions based on transportation. Maybe if we have more of these land-based aquaculture projects, we might be able to actually reduce transportation, GHG from transportation as well. So we did provide financing to this was based on salmon. So it's a land-based aquaculture project for salmon. And for us to be able to finance that, we are able to establish a stable supply chain to avoid the impact of climate change, and as well as improve food self-sufficiency in Japan as well. And again, reducing CO2 emissions from transportation. Now, the third example that I would like to mention here, I think, Doctor, you talked about digitalization. I think digitalization is also very important here, and it could, contribute to adaptation and resilience as well. So we have we are working with a consortium called the Japan Consortium for Adaptation Finance, which is basically using digital technology such as satellite images, data, wide area sensing, to basically crystallize the benefits of these adaptation or resilience projects. So that hopefully we can incentivize financial institutions or maybe insurance companies to come in at scale, hopefully. And maybe if I can wrap up with the challenges and suggestions for promoting adaptation projects. So for project owners, what the issue is, well, especially around resilience projects, it's hard to generate economic value from the projects around resilience. And also lack of data to assess risk exposure. And also impact measurement I think is very important, but I think we lack the capability to do that as well. Obviously, we are aware that there are various public financing subsidies that go into adaptation, but I think we should focus a little bit more of using that money to actually draw in private money and also collect data, as I said, I did give an example of the consortium that we joined, so collecting data and also try to price the cost of inaction as well. Once we have the measurement to do that, I think we can bring in more financial sources, not just financial institutions like us, but also there are various sources of money, for instance, like impact financing and these investors as well. For private financiers, again, the economic value is not necessarily there, so I think this is an issue. And also, I think that the low awareness of various financing schemes, I think people will talk about the adaptation fund as well today, but I think for private financial institutions in general, I think there is a lack of awareness of the various financing opportunities that are out there. Therefore, I think the strategic use of public capital to de-risk facilities is also important, but moreover, I think the collaboration or communication from these public entities and also private entities is very, very crucial, and I think there's work to do there as well. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, okay, it's working now. Thank you very much, Masa Takanishi. I think he provided a very good, and one of the key points that I really like about his presentation was, sorry, something wrong with my, yeah, one of the key points that I think he highlighted was the cost of inaction. I think climate adaptation is not only about the economic value that it generates, but the cost of inaction. So I think the last presentation for the first session for this presentation from Miss Amanda from Carbon Trust. So can we put together a hand to welcome the presentation?
Right. Okay. So thanks everyone. If we can. I want to start by thanking the Malaysian Development Bank and the Malaysian delegation for giving me the honor of participating in this panel. I'm Amanda Luna. I'm a senior manager at the Carbon Trust based in Mexico City, and I'm really pleased to be here. So during my presentation, I will try to address these three key topics by showing you some examples of the work that we have done in Latin America, driving or seeking to channel adaptation finance, especially for the agriculture and the land use and forestry sectors, that, as we have seen with our previous speakers, are some of the ones that need the most of the financing for adaptation. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. So first, I'll start by highlighting why climate policy is really related to on channeling sustainable finance, and why having a robust climate policy framework can be a driver or a key unlocker to access climate finance. And for that, I will bring the example of Bolivia, which is a country with whom we have been working for over the past 2.5 years. So Bolivia has been enhancing their climate policy framework, and to do so, they updated their NDC, and they have also been working on a climate change metric systems that is called the System of Mother Earthhood and Climate Change. And what they have been doing is investing on improving their monitoring, reporting, and verification system, and also their system for tracking social and environmental safeguards. They did this in order to join the LEAF Coalition, which is a big climate finance initiative that channels funding for conservating forest. It's basically a results-based payment. And they successfully joined the coalition in 2023. And that will give the country access to economic incentives for halting deforestation and also for improving the livelihood of indigenous peoples in the country. So this is also one of the advances that Bolivia has made in improving this climate policy framework, which is their a strategy for reducing deforestation and promoting sustainable forest management. So this is an example of why improving or having this robust climate policy framework can give access to different countries to sustainable finance or climate finance that in the end can finance adaptation projects, especially in the forestry sector. Then I want to go to Mexico and speak more about how sustainable finance can provide solutions to the agriculture sector. These are some of the results of a program we implemented for the past 6 years in Mexico. It was funded by the French Development Agency with funds also from the European Union. And what it sought to do was to drive sustainable investment towards agriculture and the rural sector in Mexico. And in the beginning of the program, we faced the key question, which was how to define the eligibility criteria and how to make sure that these funds were not just put towards like typical agriculture, but these funds were rather creating a real impact and benefiting vulnerable groups, indigenous populations in Mexico, and also contributing to climate change resilience and reduce vulnerability. And to do that, we identified 55 eligible technologies, and some of these are indeed focused on mitigation, because agriculture is one of those sectors that has both an opportunity for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time an opportunity for creating more resilience in the sector. So some of these 55 technologies indeed are focused on reducing greenhouse gases, but others are focused on enhancing the resilience of the sector. And some of these are obviously related to water management, improved irrigation systems, also promoting the sustainable use of soil so that people or agricultural producers in Mexico don't have to expand the agricultural frontier. The project ended a couple of months ago in May this year, and until that time, we had received over 500 project applications, and about half of these were already received a loan, and they are already implementing their project. And something that I also wanted to highlight in this successful example is that we helped the development bank in Mexico called FIRA introduce a tool for tracking impact. This is something that was mentioned in the previous presentation about the challenge on how to do impact reporting, because that is something that in the end it's relevant for investors, it's relevant for climate finance initiatives, and in the end it will help also countries report to the UNFCCC on how they are advancing towards their NDC goals, especially on the adaptation and sometimes also on the mitigation focus. And on the next slide, I'll talk about some of the key lessons learned and what can be useful for the Asian countries, and especially Malaysia, on how to drive funding for adaptation. So the first lesson learned, or recommendation, is that when we needed to define these eligibility criteria or define how we were going to assess and identify these eligible projects, we had to think about cost efficiency. FIRA, it's a development bank in Mexico, and it's a second-tier development bank in Mexico. That basically means that FIRA doesn't have access to direct data from loan takers. They give finance to financial intermediaries, and those financial intermediaries are actually the ones disbursing loans. So what we needed to do was to draw on FIRA's existing systems and processes in order to make it work. Otherwise, we would just create a second system or a second process that would just be another burden to FIRA and also to financial intermediaries. Another challenge or lesson learned was the lack of data and robust monitoring, reporting, and verification and key performance indicators. And as I mentioned in the slide before, what we did was to develop a tool and a set of key performance indicators so that FIRA could track the environmental and social performance of the loans that were being disbursed through the program. And we did this tool using parametric values, and that was it was a request directly from FIRA, because they, as I mentioned before, they don't have access to direct data from their clients, so they needed to use some parametric values that would allow them to do MRV, but without needing to have additional resources to do this process. Then there's also the complexity for identifying and tracking impact, and there's a word missing there on the benefits. The estimated benefits from adaptation finance will depend on the context. And that is something that we're still trying to figure out, because it's not the same financing a project that aims to improve water infrastructure in an area that has flooding problems, or that it has a bigger risk for flooding or for dry season, compared to an area that doesn't have water-related risks. The impact will vary. And that is important, because it's not the same as when you assess impact in a mitigation project where you're just basically measuring greenhouse gas reductions. In adaptation, you have to take into account other variables, and that will also include the type of population that is living or that will have benefits from the project. And finally, another challenge was how to ensure that vulnerable groups were indeed accessing adaptation finance. And that is why we introduced the eligibility criteria additional to the 55 eligible technologies that I spoke about in the previous slide. And we also had to deliver technical support with the technicians on the field, and also with financial institutions, so that they were aware that they were not only going to assess a loan by the technologies that they were going to finance or the type of projects, but rather to consider other eligibility criteria that were basically the marginalized communities, indigenous communities, and municipalities that were vulnerable to climate change. And on the last topic that I wanted to present is why working together and collaboration, as the example that was brought earlier with JOICA, is important for scaling up adaptation finance. And I'll speak about some of the work that we have delivered with the French Development Agency in Latin America. So the first example is FIRA in Mexico, the country on the top of the map, where we have worked with FIRA and the AFD, implementing the ProSostenible program that I spoke about earlier. And now we are working on helping the bank disburse a credit line that is fully focused on adaptation and climate resilience projects. And here, the AFD has not only helped FIRA as a development bank, but it has also created like a transformation within the country, because FIRA in the end channels finance to other financial institutions. So they have also started implementing these type of technologies and programs to the extent that the 55 technologies are included in Mexico's sustainable finance taxonomy. Then we have also been working with Caja Huancayo in Peru, where AFD also granted a credit line, so that Caja Huancayo is a municipal savings bank in Peru. Peru is the country on the left side of the map in the light blue. And the aim of this credit line was to finance at least 40% or to direct at least 40% of the value of the credit line to projects that had a positive climate impact. We know that AFD is also working with Banco de Desarrollo Productivo in Bolivia, which is the country on the center of the map in dark blue. And AFD is supporting the bank's efforts towards designing green and sustainable products for the AFOLU sector. And finally, we are also working with Fonplata, with funds from the AFD. Fonplata, it's a regional development bank in South America, which is highlighted in pink. And Fonplata works in countries such as Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay, which are highlighted in pink, and also Chile. And here the French Development Agency approved a credit line for financing projects that contribute to climate mitigation and adaptation, and also to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So here, just to give you like the key point, these are just examples of why partnerships with an ODA institution and development banks that work with regional banks or private financial institutions can further drive or scale up adaptation finance. And I just wanted to close by highlighting some examples of what banks and governments in the Asia-Pacific region, not just Asians, are doing in terms of adaptation finance. So here you can see first on the left side of the slide, an example from the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank, where they have directed funds for improving water infrastructure and to prevent flooding in India and in China. And something relevant here is that they consider the common principles for climate change adaptation finance tracking that were developed by different multilateral development banks. We also have an example from Asia Development Bank, where they have financed a project that helps to improve coastal and marine fisheries projects. So it's a mixture on how to improve aquaculture or fisheries, and at the same time improving resilience in coastal areas of these countries. We also have an example from Hong Kong, who issued a green bond, and some of the funds issued from this bond were directed towards projects that aim to reduce the risk of flooding in areas of the country. And finally, the sovereign bond issued by Fiji, a blue sovereign bond, that seeks to finance nature-based solutions that also provide coastal protection. So this is just to give you to maybe change the Latin America perspective and go back to the Asia Pacific and Asian region, and to show examples that adaptation finance but it's already being implemented and directed to some projects in the region. And with that, I just wanted to thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I think that comes to the end of the three presentation for our first session for today. I think I'm hearing feedback from the TV. Yeah, there's some echo. Okay. So before we end the first part of today's session, perhaps I would like to invite the floor if you have any questions for our panel speakers here today. I think they have really given good insights on what are some of the adaptation strategies and best practices that has been implemented across the region and also globally in South America, for example. And I think it's really a good learning for, for all of us in terms of implementing it in our own country or in ASEAN. So perhaps any questions from the floor before we end?
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's very wonderful presentations. My name is Ramesh Babu. I am from India. The question that I have to Professor, with regards to the integration of the plans, you mentioned about climate plans should be integrated. So is it very important? We have a Paris Agreement, we have a Sendai framework, we have so many other frameworks internationally. But what is lacking is at the ground level, when you go to the lowest governance system in the country, wherever, do you have any example how that has been integrated and seen in development in a holistic perspective? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Daniela, I beg you, my Hindu, it's not as good as yours, Sadhu. And thank you very much. It was a brilliant question. Actually, I was just in Japanese pavilion and we had a discussion about fragmentation of climate adaptation. That's actually the thing you address, because we are trying to tackle this fragmentation, all these problems with the planning. And of course, we know that these planning tools, either in strategy or in finance, can be very wrong at the very beginning, where the plans do not match the real situation. That's why I believe, and I may be a bit controversial in what I'm saying, but please understand me in this positive way, that again, returning to this DX and GX platform, so combining the digital approach with this green approach is a tool. So I believe that right now we can apply artificial intelligence in planning, not to substitute the human, but to support human. Also in climate adaptation, all these climate strategies, even at the local government level, where they will say, we do not have capacity, we are rural. The government has everything, all the policy tools and plans, etc. But the government, for instance, with the help of different organizations like experts, banking sector, etc., could develop a planning tool that could be easily adapted. Even academia can do this. I know colleagues from MIT, America, yeah? They have this type of policy tools. I'm not promoting them, I'm not selling this, it's not the sale promotion or something like this, but I'm saying that this type of models exist. And I really do believe that smart people from India, even students from many of your universities, could develop such a policy tools that could be easily adapted to the local needs. And that's very important, that this type of solutions should be tailor-cut to the local needs, because we can have wonderful plans at the very policy level, top policy level, in Latin America, in Japan, in ASEAN, in European Union, but there's no one-size-fits solution. At the very end, we have to go down and talk with these people. And I believe that with the help of these digital tools, this type of adjusting the mechanism is easier, but still the problem exists, as you know. That's why that was a great question. Thank you very much.
I think great points there that's provided by Prof. I think adaptation is is unique, right? In each country, it has to be localized, and then you have to be adapted to the needs of the specific locality. Are there any other questions? Yes, one more over there.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is more from a macro perspective. So I understand from Latin America or Asia, there's a lot of transactions or opportunities that you've been talking about. But what do you need from macro level, like COP or maybe G20, so that more adaptation finance can be, so that we can scale adaptation finance? Or is it because it's local by nature, there's not much COP can do? Is that the right way to think about it, or is there anything that you expect from the COP negotiation so that more finance can be, I guess, provided? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think indeed adaptation finance has to be designed and tailored to the local level, and maybe not even at the country level, but rather at like a jurisdiction or even a local community. But the examples that I gave, for instance, were projects that have been funded by the French Development Agency and the European Union. So in this sense, I believe that COP provides the space so that these developed countries or the multilateral development banks can commit to direct funds to finance adaptation. I know that this is meant to be the COP for finance, and that there's a big objective for defining the quantum leap goal for finance. In that sense, I think that this is the space to make those commitments and to make sure that adaptation is on the table. And that although we do need to accelerate our efforts for reaching our decarbonization goals, and as a globe and each party, adaptation should also be there. So I think that's why COP is relevant for adaptation financing. And I think that also by providing these local examples, it also gives donors an idea of the fact that they need to be flexible enough to accept that maybe impact reports are not going to be the same by every country who receives funding, but that they are going to make an effort in order to align to best practices. But at the same time, each country has different conditions or context.
Maybe if I can add to that, probably discussions around measurement, impact, reporting, not necessarily reporting, but again, measurements, and also the price of inaction, these kind of discussions, I think maybe we can have that discussion on a global basis. Obviously, each project is local, but you know, those things, and also how to incentivize financial institutions, I think that might be a theme for discussion globally, on a global basis.
Because of timing, I think that nicely wraps up the first part of today's session. Again, perhaps MC, you would like to do the...
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you to the speakers and also moderator for going through the first session. And now, Dr. Masiej, Mr. Masa, and also Ms. Amanda, you may now return back to your seat as we're going to start for our part 2. Okay, for part 2, I would like to call the following panelists on the stage for the panel discussion on the adaptation and funding need in ASEAN. We have Mr. Shahril Azwa Jimin, and we also have Ms. Melissa Moy, as well as Mr. John Adrian Narab. Once again, over to you, Mr. Joel.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of adaptation. That's why we split it into 2 parts. But I'm cautious of the time, and this session is between you and lunch, so I think we'll try to catch up with the time. So I think the topic here, I think that our previous panel of speakers give a very good overview of the context of climate adaptation. Why do we need to adapt, as well as what are some of the strategies that we can adopt in terms of adapting to a changing climate. While addressing climate change involves both climate mitigation and climate adaptation, I think because of the cost of inaction is so high that I think we should also look at focusing more on climate adaptation for ASEAN. So without further ado, I think today's session we'll go through basically to cover how do we fund some of these projects, right? The adaptation strategies. And as the previous speakers have presented, there are challenges in terms of climate adaptation projects. Typically, the economic value, hard to measure, the data, and some of these challenges. And with that as a background, perhaps then we could have a conversation around how do we work together with government agencies, government, as well as the private sector in terms of financing these projects. So to start off with, perhaps I could open up a question in terms of a very broad one. Perhaps I could get from Melissa to John to Cheryl to share on your take on climate adaptation, what it means for you and your organization, and what are some of the initiatives or things that you are doing in terms of that. So perhaps, yeah, I can pass on to Melissa to...
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be speaking at the pavilion. So I'm Melissa. I'm from United Overseas Bank. So to give you some context, we're a Singapore-domiciled, ASEAN-focused bank. I myself am Canadian, but my family's roots are from Malaysia, Sarawakian, so very well connected to the pavilion. So from a UOB perspective and thinking about it from a financial institution point of view, we really think about it from a real economy impact side of things. And when we think about challenges with deploying capital, challenges with deploying financing, what we really think are some of the key areas is focusing on real economy opportunity. And one of the challenges in terms of trying to find that financial outcome, the sort of return on investment, particularly when speaking with clients, is we don't have enough data, as was covered this morning. We don't have enough measurement. We cannot necessarily articulate what is then the financial outcome if you do invest in adaptation, which then allows our clients to then put the money towards it, and then for us as a financial institution to then allow to scale and allow these projects to be bankable. So from our point of view, I think one of the challenges that we're seeing is, number one, how do we educate? How do we have conversations on adaptation and why it's important? How do we look for the low-hanging fruit in terms of the types of projects that we can actually finance? And I think one of those opportunities is if you start thinking about the climate, nature, adaptation, mitigation nexus, meaning we already have a very mature green financing framework, understanding what types of investments and use of proceeds we can look at. Some of these sections have a section in terms of adaptation. So there's an opportunity for us to look at bankable projects, use that as an opportunity to start thinking about how we measure and quantify the impact from an adaptation perspective. And so if we can build that base of information up, we can think about those types of projects we can bring to market, have these conversations. That then allows us to think for more further apart adaptation-focused types of investments. And I'll give you an idea of what we've been trying to do from a banking perspective. So we actually have a set of frameworks and U-series types of solutions for our SME clients. One of them is our Smart Cities framework, and part of what we actually do from that is we allow our clients to piggyback on our green financing framework to find use of proceeds specifically focused on adaptation. They can then quantify and classify as green finance. We then have a set of programs that help our SMEs in particular, because they don't necessarily have a sustainability person on their team, to then build their capacity, understand how to measure, how to build strategy, and then how to then implement these types of programs. And then we are able to then direct green financing either through sustainability linked financing or use of proceeds financing towards them. So it's really about building the group of and the scale of financing that allows us to understand, adapt, and then potentially bring this to scale. And I think that using that nexus is an area of opportunity that we need to push forward.
Perhaps, John?
Thank you, and we're pleased to be here. We're pleased to be here with ASEAN family. From the Philippine side, of course, we've been, adaptation and resiliency are among our top agenda in our national plans. For this year, we were able to launch our national adaptation plan, and as Professor Solowski mentioned, I think the report of the ASEAN ought to be updated, but we just launched that this year, and it provides key 8 sectors, covering including health and even displacement and others. So these are opportunities where we're coming from the Philippines. And I'm here with fellow development banks. The Philippines, where I am currently based, and of course I'm part of the Ministry of Finance, the Department of Finance. We oversee more than 200 government corporations, state-owned enterprises, including chairing a number of development institutions, including our development banks. So we're overseeing their operations, and part of the operations that we do to them is to ensure that we implement what our presidential directive has been made. That directive is to mainstream climate actions into our operations. One of those operations is to green the financial sector. So greening the financial sector, we work with our regulatory agencies, including our monetary authority, our central bank, and through our central bank, they recently issued the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy Guidance, which is technically based from the ASEAN guidelines. And we're now updating and revisiting that to also incorporate circular economy considerations. In addition to that, we also make sure that we're able to address the pressing needs, the financial needs of our NDC. That's the reason why this year the government also launched an investment plan to make sure that the investments are readied and addressed to implement our NDC commitments. In addition to that, we're also working together with our other climate authorities and environment authorities to put in place a financial strategy to address those requirements. So these are among the key developments on how we maximize and the use of the public sector, and 2, cooperating also and collaborating with other sectors and other stakeholders, including private sector, development banks, MSMEs, even CSOs and NGOs in that regard. So these are a number of recent developments from the Philippines, and we show how important adaptation is. As we speak, there are around 4 or 5 typhoons bombarding the Philippines now, it is one after the other. I hope that it would not, affect other parts of the Southeast Asia, but that's how it is, And as our Secretary of Finance mentioned, climate actions are not born overnight. So it has to be, we have to revisit, we have to plan, and we have to continue to adapt and be more resilient. Over to you.
Thank you, John. Sherry?
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for asking me to be on this panel. A lot of what I wanted to say was already covered well in the previous speakers. But I think in terms of how a bank would be approaching this, and I think that also relates to the raison d'etre or the ethos of the bank itself. So for Maybank, we are present in all the 10 ASEAN countries, and we take pride in being a partner for development to some of these countries, many of these countries. And we work very closely with the ASEAN Secretariat, because you're talking about regional perspective. And we are an ASEAN accredited entity through our Maybank Foundation. So there's a lot of things going on within ASEAN itself. And I think that would be a good base for us to start any discussion on coming up with a regional adaptation fund. There's principally one of the things that we have is that there is an ASEAN vision on disaster management, obviously, and there's this the agreement on disaster management and emergency response. But more recently, just last year, there's this ASEAN Leaders Declaration on Sustainable Resilience. So I think there's enough framework within the countries and globally, but also at the ASEAN level, which I think can do more.
Yeah, I think there are these frameworks that's been established at the ASEAN level, right? And I think the question is, how do we? Because again, I think the issue is there's no one-size-fit-all kind of solution, right? It's really depending on the need of the locality. And within even country, there are different needs in different states, different region as well. I think that is one of the greatest challenge that we see in terms of adaptation. And I think one of the questions early on is like at a macro level, what is the need, right? What do we actually need to get, you know? And I think some statements that were given prior to this COP29 at the ASEAN statement, that there's financing requirements of about 422 billion US dollars by 2030. I think that amount is huge, but I think as compared to climate mitigation, it's still comparably low. But I think for ASEAN region, as say for example, Malaysia, we only contribute to about 1% of the global emissions. But the cost of climate mitigation is to the tune of 1.2 trillion ringgit, which is about 400 billion US dollar. I think the same would be for other countries like Singapore, for Philippines, and across the region. So I think the question is, how do we, as a, you know, with that kind of sorry, with that kind of financing requirement, right, to address both mitigation and adaptation. Perhaps I will ask John first. At a policy level, how do we balance between that? How do government balance between how much to spend in terms of climate mitigation and how much do we spend in terms of climate adaptation?
Well, in adaptation, of course, it also cuts across sectors. In our adaptation plan, we have identified 8, you know. But in terms of costing, of course, it's usually easier to cost mitigation. You know? But for adaptation, if it's cuts across, then you would include DRR, disaster risk reduction. It would also include nature-based solutions, for instance. So if you put them together, there may be instances that may be more than, you know, what mitigation targets are. We've attempted to put a price tag on our investment needs for the NDC, you know, but that would cover both adaptation and mitigation. And for just a very preliminary estimate, we've identified smaller perhaps, but you know, it could be beyond that. But we estimated below $200 billion. You know? But that's just for a few number of years. Meaning, you know, for NDC, we're just left to what, 2 or 1 year. But again, that's an evolving strategy. So that's just part of the cost. But again, if you now include more measures to address your adaptation, because adaptation is localized, adaptation should contextualize, you know, what adaptation for us may not necessarily be, you know, similar to our other Southeast Asian neighbors like Malaysia. But then again, there are measures to make sure that, you know, we're able to adapt and become more resilient. But that's hinged on how we're able to identify the price tag, identify the risk to address that, and make sure that other, you know, financing instruments will also be able to address those needs and recognize those risks that are inherent, no, to that regard. Thank you.
Okay, touching on that point on risk, right? Perhaps I'll direct the next question to Melissa. So in terms of that, right, what investment opportunities do you see in ASEAN sustainable business landscape to attract global investors looking to fund climate adaptation initiatives? Because as a bank, I would imagine UOB have a large exposure in different regions, right, where climate adaptation or climate change would affect the portfolio value in terms of that. So how do you see the opportunities in terms of supporting your clients to adapt to it?
Yeah, it's tough because it is incredibly broad in terms of both geography, because it is very geographic and contextually dependent, as well as sector specific. So there's sort of 3 major areas, and I'm not a technical specialist, so just sort of some broad themes that we're sort of exploring that we think have potential legs in terms of climate adaptation financing. And again, this is the sort of, how do we get the low-hanging fruit to build the asset class? So we need to start seeing some successes. So the first, I think, is water as a cross-cutting theme against multiple sectors. And the reason why this is important is because clearly from a climate perspective, you're seeing massive issues from water accessibility, water efficiency, need for water across agriculture, for our manufacturing, for semiconductors, for data centers, so on and so forth. And water technology exists quite as a quite mature intervention and solution. We just don't have the deployment of capital towards it. So I think water as an issue and as a cross-cutting theme, multi-sector, multi-country is one area to focus on. The second area is agriculture, as was covered this morning by our panelists. I think that there is a massive need. There is huge opportunity. The challenge is then the balancing of risk reward. And so blended finance is absolutely essential, and we need to find the different players, the multilateral banks, the philanthropic capital, as well as commercial capital to come in and play. Now, it depends on your risk profile, it depends on the impact that you're looking for, but there's a huge opportunity. And from an agriculture perspective, I think farming communities and farmers know what they need to do for the most part. It's really about their ability to access financing and whether or not they're bankable projects. The third area that I think is interesting to explore from an investable perspective is heat. In particular, thinking about urban heat and thinking about the challenges that come with it. So something, in Southeast Asia, the recent IEA report that came out, the Southeast Asia Energy Outlook, there was a piece on the increased use of air conditioning by residents in Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asian population grows by the equivalent of a Singapore every single year. And the energy usage from air conditioning in residential areas alone is increased to expand by 5 times by 2030 and 12 times by 2050. And so that, again, efficiency on heating and cooling already exists. So if we start thinking about the fact that we need to stay cool and we need to keep cool, those are opportunities of how we look at it from a urban perspective that potentially we need to be looking at.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that is really some of the areas that we can really focus on. My next question would be to Sharil. I think Maybank as one of the largest bank in this region has a broad range of products and services that you offer, right, including insurance under Attica. Perhaps I would like to could you share some examples of some of this innovative financing, where the models or examples that Maybank is exploring or have done so in the past to support climate adaptation projects?
Yeah, I think one thing that is often overlooked is that banks have got expertise in risk management and risk assessment. Yeah? So together with an insurance arm, and you are in a much better place to do this assessment. And I always say that insurance is a laggard because and they started away way much earlier before, because and I say that knowing having insurance within the group. Before, banks were worried about climate financing. Insurance was already doing programs or products like crop insurance, which is so technically difficult to do. So, but when we bring this expertise together, you are able, and working with the stakeholders, I think you can come up with some innovative solutions. So for Maybank, for example, I'll give 2 quick examples. In the early 2000s, Malaysia, especially in the big cities, KL, experienced a lot of flash floods. We still do, yeah. But in the early 2000s, it was really bad. So the government said, look, we want to see some proposals. How can we alleviate these flash floods, especially in Kuala Lumpur? And they were specific. They wanted a solution that would alleviate floods 3 to 6 hours long, right? And move away that water. So we worked together and helping the government through some private contractors, together with Matt McDermott of the UK. And what came up was this project called Smart Tunnel. Yeah. Today, this Smart Tunnel is a 10-kilometer long multi-purpose tunnel. It's the longest flood water drainage system in Southeast Asia that acts as both as a normal highway, and also when it rains heavily, and there is 4 measurement, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah? So as you know that. So when the rain is heavy enough, then it becomes the funnel for water to flow out, and that has proven so successful that multiple times, I think that the mode 4 has already been triggered, that has saved potentially hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage. Yeah? So that's one. And more recently, working with Sarawak state government, Sarawak River is a very important river that flows right through Kuching. We not too sure how the technical aspects of this, but we built the financed retaining wall for the river itself. Yeah, so because the river overflows, so that's something that I think with good collaboration you are able to do that.
Yeah, I think Shahril provided some really good example of how do we actually unlock the bankability of some of these infrastructure projects. As I think one of the our previous panel, previous speakers talk about, these projects tends to be, it's very challenging to generate revenue, right? So I think the example on the Smart Tunnel provides a very good example of how do we finance a project that serves as a flood mitigation effort, but at the same time be able to generate revenue and a consistent revenue flow, right? And that's where it becomes bankable, where development financial.
The toll that you have paid is not cheap, eh?
Exactly. So there's user pay, and there's a government. So it's sort of like a blended finance, a public-private partnership as well. And I think more of this type of solutions can be replicated across, I think, different parts of the country. And I think we are maybe running out of time. Perhaps I would like to open 10 more minutes. We have 10 more minutes. Yeah, I would like to open to the floor if you have any questions for our panel speakers here today.
Thank you again. So my question is, where do you draw the line between what the type of project, what the government has to basically lead and fund, and where private institution can play a role? I mean, Shahril, your example sounds like that's the business of the government, and also your case about water resilience. I don't know whether it's a private sector's role, but it's mainly the government's role. And my question is, who will determine whether it's something that private sector can finance, or is it basically the government who will say, okay, this is such an important for KL or Singapore, so that, and the government will do it, but maybe this portion, private sector can take because the risk is lower, et cetera, et cetera. But who do you think is in the driver's seat to make that decision? Is this the public sector's role or the private sector's role?
Lisa, you want to go first?
So my view is, and this is a cop-out answer, both, Thomas-san. So it really depends in terms of the cross-cutting impact that a particular intervention has. And I think Singapore is an interesting example in terms of how it looks at managing and mitigating some of its adaptation-related investments. So flooding is also an issue in Singapore. We get massive torrential downpours, very, very sudden, huge volume of water. And what we have is we have an overall climate adaptation policy that's been set in place by the government. And what you see is this carving out in particular sectors where they have close relationships with sector bodies, with the industry, that allows the industry to then take a specific role in climate adaptation related measures. And I'll give you an example. There's a lot of buildings in Singapore. We have a lot of real estate. The government works with the Building and Construction Authority, which works with all of the developers and all of the built environment folks in Singapore. There is a regulation that requires if you have a building with a larger footprint than 0.2 hectares, you must build flood mitigation related infrastructure, including green roofs and detention tanks, so that when there's heavy rainfall, it can hold the water so that it doesn't completely inundate our local flooding systems in place. And so when you have that ability to influence and work with private sector through proper regulation and through guidelines and certification, then you're able to have that interplay. Now, would they expect the local companies to be able to build an entire flood tunnel? Likely not. But so it's that really interplay of understanding where you can have distributed responsibility as part of regulation in that type of relationship. Not always easy, but it really takes that inter-ecosystem conversation in order to understand where those opportunities lie.
Thank you, Tomo-san. Tomo likes to ask these kind of philosophical questions, which I appreciate. And I think he does a great job of representing his bank for that. So remember when the first thing I said in the first question also depends on the raison d'etre or the ethos of your bank. So I think for my bank, as I also mentioned, we play that partner for national development role, and not just for this. I think for it's about the entire sustainability agenda today, where there's no more short-termism, right? So who makes that call? I would also say is the investors, because part of what I do is to meet investors and shareholders, yeah, and share with them. And I think there's a lot more agreement by the investors today that they do understand that they're willing to see lesser profits, yeah, for the invested company doing good, yeah. So, and I see that shift.
On the part of the Philippines experience, let me answer by saying this. We have recently enacted, revisited the revised PPP code. So that would provide more enabling environment where private sector participate. No? And just recently, a few days ago, we've enacted an updated law to incentivize more investments, for instance, in strategic investments that would include, among others, green, renewable energy. So these are among sectors where it would depend on the market, of course. In the Philippines, in the case of for energy, it's liberalized, it's deregulated. So that's the reason why where private sector comes in, we provide improved enabling environment, we provide more incentives, be it tax holidays, be it providing more opportunities for them to participate and enticing them to do PPP partnerships. And others, of course, but for flood management, of course, that's for now, that's purely the government leading it. That's because of the investments needed. And that's because we're an island nation of 7,641 islands. So that's the reason why the risks will have to be carried on, or at least naturally be at least addressed by, mitigated by the Philippine government. But then again, we also work with our subnational governments. So there are certain sectors where these are also devolved. We partner, we continue to have a national government, local government coordination, for instance, in terms of health, environment, even solid waste management, for instance. So there are a lot of opportunities where both, there could be purely public, but most of them are, of course, a blended approach between the public and private sector, provided the market is there, the enabling environment is provided, and of course, with the right incentives also to private sector to work on this sector. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I think looking at the timing, I think perhaps we could, one more questions if there's any burning questions from the floor before we close. No? Any questions? No? That's, okay, so perhaps for closing, perhaps I could invite the speakers to maybe provide a closing view, not more than 30 seconds, just a very short liner of what do you think would unlock climate action, climate adaptation for our ASEAN region? Just a closing remark.
30 seconds. I think let's focus on what we can do now and not sit and wait for the perfect solution. There are opportunities, there are partnerships that can and should be happening, and it's really the everything everywhere all at once mentality.
I mentioned already the work that has been done by the ASEAN Secretariat. I still believe there's a lot more that can be done there because there's already that vehicle, right? So I think there's a lot more that can be done there.
I think we have to capitalize on all sectors possible, meaning human, social, and of course the partnership within the region and internationally. So that's also key to make sure that all actions would be valued, and adaptation will be key, of course, among the key actions that will be important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all the speakers here today. A round of applause to the speakers, and I hope that the audience here find it useful today in terms of the insights that's been shared by the 3 speakers earlier and my 3 panel speakers here today. And I hope you have a good lunch and have a good day ahead. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you to all the speakers and also moderator. Before that, can we have a group photo session before we left the hall? Yes, the other speakers as well. All the speakers. Big smile. And then one photo. Yes, the token of appreciation. Okay, one group photo. Can we have the speakers to line up in front of here with the audience? We wanted the audience all to be in the camera. Stand up. Okay, everyone stand up and then smile at the camera. We wanted everyone to be inside the camera, yeah? Freestyle. And then for the videos, please wave to the videos and then big smile. Okay, nice. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good lunch, and then we will meet you guys at 2 p.m. later.